When you read the Bible, you will understand that Adam and Eve were so far God's most beloved amongst all his creations, so we can say that their disobedience to God's instructions is so far the greatest betrayal in the Bible. But let's look at it from this perspective. When you read the book of Genesis, God first created the trees, the animals, the birds of the skies, day and night, and every other thing he wanted to create. But on the sixth day, he realized there was one more thing which was the most important thing he needed to create. So he said, "Let us create man in our own image and after our own likeness." So even though he already had numerous creations, man was the creation of God that took after his own image and likeness. So he made man from the dust, breath into him, and he became a living soul, and he decided to call him Adam, which according to several Hebrew translations means son of the red earth, which comes from the fact that Adam was made out of dust. But let's take a closer look at this. By the time God gave Adam the command to abstain from the tree of knowledge of good and evil in Genesis 2 verse 16 to 17, Eve, who was Adam's companion, had not yet been created. That practically gives the indication that Adam was the one who communicated God's instructions about the tree to Eve. So there could be a possibility that Adam might have not communicated God's instructions to Eve with the same intensity God did, and everything proves that Eve was not as firmly minded as Adam, which gave room for the serpent to step into the picture. Now, who is the serpent? From biblical perspective, the Bible did not really specify whether the serpent that was talked about in Genesis 3 was the same as Satan, so a lot of people hold the argument that the serpent could be anyone else. But you will be surprised to know that the Bible uses the name serpent interchangeably for Satan several times in the Bible, including Luke 10 verse 17 to 19, and even the book of Revelation. So it is without doubt that the serpent that was been referred to in Genesis chapter 3 was undoubtedly Satan. Although Satan had not yet been introduced in the Bible as at the time the serpent appeared to Eve, we can understand later in the Bible that even before man was created, Satan was already enemies with God. So his main goal was to corrupt God's creation, knowing very well the extent to which God loved man. So for the serpent, getting man to rebel against God was surely his own way of fighting against God's authority, which we had already seen him do in the heavens. But before the devil could carry out his plans, he knew there was one thing in his way, which is Adam. Unlike Eve, Adam was a much stronger vessel, and would have been very difficult to get him to directly disobey God's command. But the serpent knew there was a way out. He could first get Eve to eat the fruit. And after that, since Eve was from Adam's very own ribs, we can say Eve was Adam's weakness, so he could easily get Eve to convince Adam to eat the fruit, and that was just what happened. But have you ever thought about this? What if Adam refused to eat the fruit after Eve attempted to convince him to do so? Will God have sacked Eve alone out of the garden and create another woman for Adam? Or God would have pardoned Eve and allow her stay in the garden? I must tell you here that this is so far one of the most difficult biblical questions, but let's think about this. One of the declaration God made to Adam and Eve in the garden was that they should be fruitful and multiply. So in the sight of God, Eve was like a wife to Adam, and the idea of multiplication would have been entirely thwarted if Eve is sacked out the garden, leaving Adam alone in the garden. But what about if God as well would have decided to forgive Eve? That as well would not be possible, since Eve had already eaten the fruit and had already lost God's glory. She would already feel emotions like anger, hate, and resentment, which Adam would not feel as a result of his pure nature. Aside that, the tree of life was still in the garden, and if Eve would have ate the tree of life at any point in time, that would mean she would live forever in her sinful state, and sin would have been something which will have remained forever. But there is one lesson here that we should all learn. If Satan thinks he cannot get you directly, he will always attempt to use something or someone who you dearly love and cherish to make you fall, just like he did to Adam. Stay on guard, and always arm yourself with God's word in order to overcome the devil's deception. Please do us a favor by hitting the like button and don't forget to share with others. Shalom.